We are now live on Patient Advocates Transforming Healthcare Tuesday Table Talk. Welcome to our audience for joining us for another 30-minute conversation on all things healthcare, healthcare transformation, and innovation. My name is Hala Dura. I am the founder of Patient Advocates Transforming Healthcare, also known as PATH, as well as a patient family engagement consultant. I am really pleased to introduce our guest today and our topic, which I think is always a timely one, but particularly during these unprecedented times. We're going to be talking today to Ogo Ekewame about clinician burnout and the patient experience. She is a health systems engineer and a great path leader and friend that I'm really excited to have this conversation with today. I don't know anyone better to really dig into this topic than Ogo, and so I'm really pleased and honored that she's joining us today. For our audience, if you'd like to ask any questions during our conversation, please feel free to sign into YouTube, and we're happy to take your questions today and get to as many as we can. I also wanted to remind our audience a little bit about who we are as PATH. PATH is a diverse, passionate coalition of independent healthcare thought leaders who seek to transform healthcare through integration and advancement of patient, family, caregiver, and community engagement. Through our coalition's advocacy, experiences, and expertise, we serve as trusted partners in the quest for a more equitable and community-centered healthcare system. And through these table talks, we hope to inspire and lead more conversations and actions in this space. So I'm not going to take too much time away from Ogo today because I'm really excited to hear her insights on this topic. Certainly, we know that COVID has produced an additional challenge on clinicians and healthcare teams in terms of their time and being stretched to the max. We know healthcare systems also share that same burden. In particular, we know that just because you're a clinician doesn't mean you may not also be a caregiver as well in your own home. And so Ogo brings a really unique perspective about this in her work in health systems engineering around this particular topic. And I'm really excited to kind of hear some of her insights. And maybe we could just start with a brief overview, Ogo, of kind of the landscape as it is right now, and some of maybe just some high-level insights you may have. And then hopefully we can dig a little bit deeper into the topic.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. So I'm super pleased. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for the heartfelt introduction, Hala. So yes, my name is Ogo Ekewame. I am a health systems engineer. I've done a variety of work across various health systems, small and large, and even with the federal government, working with our military health system. Right now, I am working with Career Haven, a company I founded, and our focus is on bringing technical and analytical solutions and strategies to addressing exactly what we're talking about, clinician burnout. But we want to really focus on, well, what are the root causes? But the current landscape, a lot of what we're talking about when we say clinician burnout, it's an umbrella. We're in this umbrella, and we haven't really focused on the root cause. And so what ends up happening with a lot of the strategies around resilience training and how you and I were alluding to some of the other tools, health and wellness tools that are being put out there. They're putting Band-Aids on a very deep wound, and actually a multifaceted wound. And so with the work that I've done, we actually just concluded a project with a medium-sized hospital in Florida in the midst of COVID. And there are a lot of things that we discovered about this term we call clinician burnout. But let me preface our discoveries by saying addressing clinician burnout will always still be a priority because of the direct correlation to the patient experience. So when it comes to the safety of patients, the satisfaction of patients, and all their health outcomes, we have to continue to address it. But in this day and age, and especially after COVID, it's time for us to really stop and look at, well, what is creating what we're seeing? To me, in our company, clinician burnout is a symptom. So we're not creating solutions for a symptom. We're creating solutions for root cause. And one of the biggest root causes that we've seen, not the only one, but one of the main ones that we've really spent a lot of time digging into, is this concept of double duty distress. And you know, you and I talked about, I've talked about this a lot. And I want to use this platform to really get this information out there that our clinical caregivers, we tend to look at them as just that, clinicians, working and caring for the patients. A lot of the strategies and policies and all these things that we're creating are so focused on the clinical side that we forget that as human beings, we are multifaceted. That is not our jobs that define us. There are a whole host of things that we engage in outside of work that also contribute to our perspective and especially our emotional well-being and stability. And unfortunately, our health system places such great emphasis on the clinical aspect that we ignore all the other aspects that contribute to what we see in the clinical setting. So a lot of when we went into these facilities and started to do this work, you know, we were assuming that, okay, maybe 20, 30%, you know, comparing it to AARP study on caregivers, family caregivers, you know, that 1 out of 5 roughly in the workforce are family caregivers. Actually, in the clinical space, it's more like 80, 90%. It's significantly larger because what ends up happening is that our most caring individuals in the population are probably caring for children, relatives, parents, a whole host of other people, in addition to their work in the clinical space. So what I tell health systems is you need to start wrapping your mind around an invisible patient that is wearing your workforce out. Before they even get to that bedside, they have spent hours delivering care. And that has huge implications for their ability to concentrate, for their ability to diagnose, for their ability to follow all these clinical workflows. We already know EMRs are stressing us out. And we need to improve the way that they are built. But before we even get to the EMR and all these pieces that are within the clinical setting, we need to look external. And unfortunately, most, if not all, organizations do not have a good grasp of this. In the hospitals that we've worked with, and even in educational institutions that we're working with as well. We're seeing very high amounts of stress. And when we start to, you know, talk about the concept of double duty, caring in two very separate realms, but performing the same type of work, it's like a aha moment. Literally, everyone is like, yes, that's what I'm dealing with. That's what I'm experiencing. That's what's happening. Literally, nurses and doctors are telling us, Ogo, it feels like we are on call 24 hours a day, but we're not getting paid for most of it. We're thinking clinicians are spending this amount of time caring. For a lot of them, it's around the clock. So how then do you build wellness programs, clinician burnout programs, resiliency programs around 24 hours of work? It's hard to grasp, it's hard to really think about, but this is literally what we spend our time diving into. So I want to sort of dispel a myth, or not a myth, expand on something we all understand. So we know with clinician burnout, we tend to think of the natural progression from compassion fatigue to burnout. Starts with starting to feel a little bit depolarized, exhausted emotionally, and left unchecked leads to burnout. With our work, we've discovered that actually compassion fatigue is split in half. You've got clinical compassion fatigue and familial compassion fatigue. And if your wellness program does not actually examine both of those domains and factor both of them in, you're only addressing one half of a whole. And that in our company, we call it emotional equilibrium. That every clinician, in order to do their best work, they must be at emotional equilibrium. But in order to be at equilibrium, you have to understand two halves of the whole. You have to measure, you have to address, you have to build the infrastructure that's going to cater to those two halves equally, not one more than the other. Because right now what our healthcare system does is it caters to one more so than the other. even if you check literature, Hala, everything when it comes to caregiving is more so focused on the patient or the patient's family member. And that's not wrong. I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, I'm against family caregivers. No, no, no. That's not wrong. We need to have that focus because it's important. But what ends up happening when we don't spend as much time focusing on the clinician, it's imbalance. So that clinician is trying to get into a state of equilibrium, but the system only factors for one part. And so what we're doing is now we're building technology, we're educating, we're building strategies, we're working on infrastructure to actually address root cause. You know, I'm all for resilience training, but what we're seeing on the floors is it's not enough. Literally, I was in a morning huddle with, not evening huddle, actually, I take it back, evening huddle with a group of nurses. And we were talking and we were having, you know, very insightful discussion. There was a nurse in the back who, you know, her demeanor, the way she was positioned, she, like, you should just tell she doesn't want to hear it. I'm tired. I don't care what you have to say. Like, you could just feel it. And, you know, in trying to talk to her, she almost bit our head off. And so I literally thought, oh, this must have been the end of the shift. And we took up too much time. So we apologize. Actually, it was the beginning of the night shift. And I immediately thought, what walked into the door with her? And what does that mean for the patients that she's about to see? But healthcare doesn't factor that in. Healthcare doesn't see what happened before she entered the door. And that's why we're doing the work that we're doing. And so we're building out these concepts and strategies and making sure that that everyone, healthcare organizations, institutions, leaders, they understand that double duty distress actually should be part of the conversation. If we're talking compassion fatigue, we've got to talk about double duty distress. Let's stop, you know, bubbling everything up into burnout. Let's talk about what it is. Actually, what is this? What is it that we're dealing with? Because at the end of the day, we are wanting to take better care of the patients. But if we think about it, Hala, we spend so much time taking care of the patient and telling the patient, well, let's drill down to the root cause. What's happening? You know, let's not just treat the symptoms, let's cure it. Why can't we do the same for our healthcare system, for what's driving our clinicians away? And with COVID, it's accelerated what we already saw coming, which is a mass exodus. And I tell every company that we're working with, you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared and you need to get ahead of this. And so I'm happy to have this discussion. We can go even deeper, but I definitely, you know, open the floor for questions. Any other questions you have, Hala, or from the audience? You know, I could talk about this all day, every day.
And we both could. I think maybe one day we'll have a marathon Path Tuesday table talk that goes into Wednesday. Do a marathon, but you know, I really loved your description of drilling down to that root cause. And we apply root cause analysis so much in healthcare. But when it comes to some of this particular issue, for whatever reason, we shy away from it. We don't use the tools that we already have in the healthcare quality and safety toolbox. We seem to kind of hesitate, and for whatever reason, and we could talk about all those different reasons. But I love that description of the invisible patient. I've never heard it presented that way, and I really appreciate you sharing, you know, your experience with that and with your career haven and your company's really mission and trying to you know, take away those layers and really get to that root cause. So, you know, you talk about, you know, having to break down the compassion fatigue, and I would say, you know, maybe now COVID fatigue has its own little, you know, space in this. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like now. And you know, you kind of alluded to kind of the mass exodus that has begun. I certainly in my own work have seen that, you know, whether it's from quote unquote burnout, or it's from, you know, some of the financial strains of COVID breaking down, you know, particularly around primary care. But certainly, the stress of the environment, no one can underestimate what that's been. Talk to me a little bit about what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Is there, what is really going to have to be the approach to address what has happened because of COVID, and how do we get to that? How do we get to the other side?
No, that's an amazing question. So what we've seen, two things are happening when it comes to the clinician's perspective. You have your clinicians who they're over it. They're done. They're hanging in there simply off of, supporting my fellow colleagues. But once it's done and I'm out. Like they've mentally checked out. Then you have those who, they still want to do the work. They still want to come into this domain. But the heaviness of what's happening, and almost, some of them, someone used the word betrayal. I felt betrayed by the healthcare system that I've given so much of my life to. They're seeing this and they're asking themselves, is it worth dying at the stake for the current healthcare system as it is? Was it worth the years? Was it worth the sacrifice? Was it worth not being with family? Was it worth all the time spent away from the ones I loved? Was it worth it? How did our healthcare system repay them? I asked a few of the individuals I'm close to, say, what is your organization doing for you? Someone said, oh, we got donuts. And it hurt me. It hurt me, honestly. And for what they do, we have to do better. We have to do better, and we have to go into recovery mode now, not when COVID finally disappears. We have to do it now. And in order to do that, number one, we're going to have to bring clinicians to the table and truly address what their needs are. But what's going to happen is, even when you open up the table, and I've seen this happen a couple times in institutions and healthcare organizations, they try to talk to their teams. They try to ask, what do you need? What do you want? And the infrastructure they've built for years works against them. So we saw it in action where we're having these discussions. There is general consensus. Yeah, this is an issue. Okay, what do we do? Tell us what you need. Crickets. Crickets. Nobody wants to say anything. Why? Because the culture of our health system does not actually cater to being open, being direct, and really advocating for individual needs on the clinician's end. There's the superhero complex that we have failed to break down, the suck it up and do your job mentality, internal bullying. There's so much that literally hovers above all our clinicians. And even when it comes down to expressing what they need, they can't do it. And then what we also discovered is that a lot of organizations, they take pride in saying, we built a culture of trust. Our clinicians trust us, our employees trust us, and for all the right reasons. They've got the right checks and balances, they've built, appropriate team dynamics, they've got managers that are trained, they invest in training, all of those things. It's great. But actually, with the work that we're doing, we discovered that there is another layer of trust that healthcare hasn't even scratched the surface of. And that's, we coin it familial trust. I've got to trust you with my deepest self, the things I care the most about, the things I'm going to automatically want to preserve and protect. If I can't trust you with that, then you'll never be able to truly appeal and cater to my needs. And organizations do not have the infrastructure to actually showcase that. They don't even know where to start. There's a disconnect, a huge disconnect. And we're coming in with all our technology and analytics. I'm a numbers geek, and I'm ready to run numbers, do risk analysis, all of this stuff. And we're ending up having to go back to the basics. Do you have this level of trust? If the answer is no, nothing else we do afterwards will work. You're putting a Band-Aid on a very deep wound. It's not going to work. That Band-Aid is going to constantly come off, constantly. And so if there are leaders out there that are watching this, I highly recommend sitting down and thinking about, do my employees, do my clinicians truly trust us with their deepest self to showcase what they really need? Our most at-risk clinicians are our nurses, because they are the ones we generally call to help. In times of need, whoever the nurse is in that family, they are coming to the rescue. And that is the attribute we love in our nurses. And that is the attribute that is suffocating our nurses. And our health system has spent so much time maximizing their return on that attribute, and left our clinicians and our nurses feeling bankrupt, emotionally bankrupt. And in order to rebuild, it starts with trust. But if you don't have the infrastructure where they can truly trust you, and I know someone's going to say, oh, we build psychological safety. Oh, no. It's deeper than that. It's so much deeper than that. The employees, the clinicians that tend to leave at the point of mental distress. It's not, whatever issue they're experiencing didn't just start. It's been bubbling and bubbling and bubbling. And managers are unable to recognize those triggers, those symptoms, because everyone's calling it burnout. So they're looking for burnout. Where is burnout? You can't find burnout. You can't. You find the root cause of the burnout. But if you don't know what that is and what that looks like, and you don't have the infrastructure that actively works to keep clinicians in emotional equilibrium, you've got nothing. And after COVID, those are going to be the organizations that fold.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that, having the ability to be vulnerable with your organization is not something that healthcare knows how to do. It's certainly not being taught in medical schools, nor in residency training or fellowship training. I almost think it's, to a point, and not to be so blunt, it's almost beaten out of you that that is not allowed per se in this space, right? The ability to be vulnerable. And I think trust is based on that vulnerability and that ability to have the time and the space and the grace for that vulnerability. And I mean, I hear it even in, patient engagement work, right? And so I wonder, what, as we have kind of just a few minutes left, where are those levers that we can start to push? And for not just health system leaders, but even, patient, family, community engagement advocates and leaders. Certainly I've always been, an advocate that really wanted to reinforce that, empathy goes both ways, compassion goes both ways. It's not one-sided. We're all on this human journey together, right? And we're all part of the same healthcare team. And so, where are those levers we can maybe start to even just push a tiny bit to get to that place where, we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable with one another. We can allow ourselves to be vulnerable with our institutions. And we can begin to really have these authentic and meaningful conversations and not just silo it in this burnout resiliency bubble, right? Talk to me a little bit about your kind of final thoughts on that as we kind of close out our talk today.
No problem. The easiest cost-effective way that we can start moving in the right direction is getting out of ourselves and thinking about the other person in the room. So for our clinicians who are taking care of patients, that caregiver in that room has to be recognized. Actually ask, oh, who are you? What's your name? Nice to meet you. Engage them in discussion as you would a patient. Granted, I know we're working against, these these patient contact times. I know. But the fact that they are in that room, or even now in COVID times where you can't be in the room, but you're on the phone, spend 1 minute and actually ask Who's on the phone? How are you? How are things going? How is it helping your family member with their health? Is there anything I can do for you? They are a patient too. Now, on the flip side, with our leaders, as we're talking to our clinicians about the work that they do, and we're trying to, meet demand with very limited supplies, we're short staffed, all of these things, you need to spend just as much time catering to that clinician's external world. How is your family? How are things going with everything outside? What else can I do for you? What else can I provide you with? Where else can I steer you? Part of the problem is our leaders are afraid to ask because of what clinicians will tell them. Like, this is what I truly need. And some organizations may not be built to actually provide what their clinicians really need, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't ask. To ask anyway, acknowledge that you may not have it right now, but we definitely will work to make the appropriate accommodations to make sure you have what you need. But when you showcase to your clinicians that their life isn't just patients, it's the yin and yang of both of their roles, being in the clinical setting and at home. When you show them that that balance is just as important to you as that patient, they will do the same for their patients. We can't give what we don't get. And it just baffles me how our health system wants our clinicians to give, and they don't get it in return. And it's so much more than just, throwing out a wellness program, saying that there are EAP benefits. And I'm not saying this to diss anyone or to make anyone feel like what they're doing doesn't work. You're on the right track, but don't ever think that that's all. That, oh, I've got an EAP, I checked the box, and that's all I can provide. I've got an app, I checked the box, and that's all I can provide. Or we scheduled a training, I checked the box, and that's all that we can provide. No, you've got to dig deeper. It's a continuous process. Equilibrium, the very word equilibrium requires a constant focused effort on maintaining that balance. Meaning it's not something you do one day or you plug in something, it's done. We've spent too much time looking for those types of solutions. It's now time to actually give it the time and effort it requires.
I couldn't agree more. And sadly, we're at the end. I'm telling you, we're going to have to do a marathon one day on this topic, because I do believe, and I'm not just saying this because Ogo is in front of me, but you are able to kind of frame this discussion in such a nuanced way that I believe is so innovative and transformative. And I do hope that leaders who are listening in or may tune in later to listen to this talk really take many of your approaches to heart and really understand that these are people suffering silently. And that to me is, we can talk about all the data that we've collected on burnout and resiliency. But at the end of the day, if we don't remember that these are humans quietly suffering, and sadly, some of them have even taken their own lives because of that suffering, then what does that say about us as fellow human beings? What does that say about us who are there to care for others when we don't care for our own? So thank you, Ogo, for shining a light on such an important topic. I hope we can have many continued conversations, because certainly I know this is a process improvement exercise, and I know you'll continue to help guide us on this journey. And thank you to our audience for joining us today on Path Tuesday Table Talk. We will see you all next week, same time, same channel. And thanks again for your support. Ogo, if you could just sit with me for a few seconds as we close out the stream. And thanks again for joining us. Take care.